Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I have a fantastic guest. I have had her on before. I have invited Amanda Stern, who is the author of the memoir Little Panic, to come back on the show and talk to us about what it's like to grow up with anxiety and how she would have treated herself, or how, the wisdom that both of us have having grown up with anxiety that we wish that parents knew. And so we have a great conversation about anxiety, about how to help a child with anxiety, the mindset shifts needed for anxiety, what we both wished our parents would have done differently. And then we go into Amanda's fantastic resources that she has. She has an anxiety course for parents to take to understand their child's anxiety. Definitely check out her memoir, Little Panic. Such a good read. So well written. And she also has a newsletter, which is phenomenal, that I actually didn't know about, called the How to Live newsletter, where she writes each week on making psychological ideas, methods, and theories in a simplistic way. And she's a fantastic writer, so I bet you that's a really great newsletter. So I will link all of that. But if you go to amandastern.com, all of her things, her book, her newsletter, her Little Panic workshop is all there. So you can check that out. I also want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and luckily they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is a right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes for that as well. So without further ado, here is my interview with Amanda Stern. Well, I want to welcome Amanda Stern to the show again. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh my God, you're welcome. I love being on your show.
I loved your book, Little Panic. And I had you on in the past to talk about your book and just your experiences with panic and separation anxiety. But I thought it would be great for you to come back on and talk about what it's like to live with anxiety. And we can both share this because we're both recovering children of anxiety disorders into adulthood with anxiety disorders, just what we'd want parents to know about what their kids are going through, and your insights as you toured around with your book and talked to a lot of people and presented as far as childhood and teen anxiety.
Yes, I would love to get into that. I also would like to say that term, recovering child, is genius. I mean, we're all recovering children,
right?
Hopefully. Some of us are not, but it's such a great way to think about adulthood.
Yeah, that is how I feel. Like that is completely how I feel.
Yeah, me too.
Does make sense. What would you want to tell parents? And I think reading your book, I feel like we both had similar childhoods in the sense that our parents were not mentally stable enough to handle our own anxiety.
Right.
So there's a parallel there. So I wonder if we can just jump into it and talk about what would be ideal in a perfect world as far as a parent supporting a child with anxiety.
So the most important thing I think I could possibly say about this is that a parent who raises the child that they have and not the child that they want is the best parent for an anxious child. And also the best parent. Like every child is different. You can't parent all your kids the same. And if you have one kid, you can't parent them necessarily how you were parented just because they're a kid and you're a parent.
Mm-hmm.
We are all individuals. We're all very different people. And so I think it's really valuable for parents to take a moment and see the child that they have. And instead of trying to fix them or, get them to do things the way everyone else does, or, to stress about how they're different. Lean in to their difference and lean into what makes them who they are. And that's the only way that you can really understand what is happening for them and how to parent them. So that's one sort of major thing that I would say would be an ideal situation. And I guess another ideal situation is that, I don't think that parents do, or not parents, but people. I don't think people do a ton of research before they enter into a big commitment or a big life stage. Or I'm a researcher. I research everything. And that's just who I am because I have anxiety. And so information calms me down.
Yeah.
But I've also noticed that information prepares me. So not only am I calmed, I'm prepared. So before I got my dog, I did like 6 months of research into, how to train a dog and how to make sure your dog doesn't have separation anxiety. And I feel like people, before they have children, should research not necessarily how to parent, although they should, but how they suffer. Like if you're not in therapy, if you're, and I would love to just say go to therapy, but that's not as easy as it sounds. But really investigate like your own anxiety, really investigate your own depression, really investigate like the things in you that upset you or your partner or your friends, because that is what you're bringing to your child's childhood. And you can't recognize in someone else what you can't recognize in yourself.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
love that because I feel like sometimes this is all really like mindset work for the parent.
Yeah.
And I think often we look at our child as a specimen separate from us. Like we
Right.
have this like blank slate lens that we're looking at, and you're bringing up so many issues that I resonate with. I think one, your first point is really the grief of parenting a child that you didn't want to show up to parent, if that makes sense.
It makes
And we have to be
total
really,
sense.
you have to be honest and raw with yourself. And I know like I have 3 kids, all with different anxiety and OCD themes, all different flavors. And I have to parent each one in a different way, which
Exactly.
is incredibly
Really tough.
exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And having that grief of, and like one of my children, I have a harder time accepting, like accepting where they're at versus where I want them to be at.
Yeah.
And that's a grief process, but then really working through that and just being like, I love them where they're at right now. And this is
Mm-hmm.
who they are. And that's a lot of our work.
Right.
And I think your second point of the stuff that's dirtying our lens is really important because we see our kids through our own struggles. And if we weren't in tune with our struggles beforehand, we're going to be when our kids pop out of us because they're
Right.
going to trigger it.
Right. And it's going to be late. It's not too late, but it's going to be late.
Yeah.
And, best to like sort of enter into that dynamic with some knowledge and preparation. I was just going to say something about, oh yes, that I think that it all sort of boils down to learning how to sit with and live with discomfort and uncertainty, because it's so hard to do. And if you're unable to sit with your own distress and your own discomfort and your own uncertainty, then you will not be able to sit with the discomfort of having a child who is not the child you imagined. So
Yeah.
that's also a good practice, is like, sitting with uncertainty and discomfort. I mean, who
Yeah.
wants to do that? No one, but
But it's what we're asking our kids to do. And so it's something that we have to do ourselves.
yeah,
And I think
exactly.
it brings up 2 different issues, like the 2 different responses that happen when you don't learn how to sit with discomfort. And it's never too late. I mean, everybody listening to this already has kids, so it's not too late. But one is you're going to show up with anger because your child can't handle discomfort, or they're dysregulated, or they're panicking, they're making you late, or they're ruining the vacation, or they can't eat. And so it's overwhelming. And so you can show up with anger. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, you show up with a safety net. And so you're like, I can't handle their discomfort. And so I'm going to rescue them and I'm going to cocoon them from everything so that
Yeah.
they don't have to feel it. And then they go out into the real world and they're raw because they've been cocooned their whole life.
Right. And then they end up taking that on themselves and cocooning themselves by continuing to avoid that which is difficult or any obstacle in their way. And I think a lot of parents don't understand because it feels so counterintuitive, to not remove the obstacle. It feels counterintuitive to remove the obstacle. Wait,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do double negatives in my head or out
I,
loud.
I know what you're
What
saying.
I'm saying is that when parents remove obstacles from their children's path, they're not teaching them how to handle difficulty and challenges. And if they're not learning how to deal with the everyday challenges of life, what are they going to do without you?
Mm-hmm.
When they're in college, even when they leave the house in the morning to go to high school, like a kid has to be prepared and know how to handle, how to handle small and large challenges.
Yeah,
You
I totally agree. And I think back to my childhood, and it was, my mom would like force me to do hard things, but
know?
out of a lack of care or a lack of insight, right? And so it was like there's no safety net, but it was get out of the car. You already threw up. Keep going. It's fine. I got to go to work. And I feel like, just looking back at like our childhoods versus how we maybe want, other people to treat anxious kids. I think about my kids and they have the exact same physiological presentation because,
Right.
genetics is a beast. And, I think about my daughter, both my daughters have had panic attacks. And I think about, my daughter's having a panic attack and I'm doing the same things as far as I'm pulling into the parking lot and I'm encouraging her to go in. But my words are different. Like there's some validation of like, I know this is hard and I'm here to support you. What do you think will happen if you don't go in? Will it be easier the next time? And what next step do you want to take? Like more coaching, but
Yeah.
with also that encouragement to face the discomfort.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's also another thing to bring up too, just to make things even more difficult for human beings, is that kids with anxiety have different types of anxiety, and that like how your daughter's anxiety. It may differ from your other daughter's anxiety, but you know how to sort of relate to it and talk to it in that moment. That for some people takes some time to figure
Mhm.
out, like how what is working and what isn't, and to just try a bunch of different things, because you have to parent the child you have, including the anxiety. So you have to parent the anxiety your child has, you know
Yep.
and it
Yep.
could be different than what you understand anxiety to be.
Yeah. And all kids need different things. So even asking them, even with my daughter, what she needed at 5 and 6 is so different that now at almost 13. And there was like this really quiet time in between where she was doing really well. And then all of a sudden it started again last 6 months. And so I asked her, like, how do you want me to support you? Like, what do you want me to say to you when you're in the middle of an anxiety attack? They're kind of anxiety attacks, not panic attacks most of the time because they're situational. And it's normally she's
Yeah,
about to go do something that is making her overwhelmed. But
sure.
her answer was different than because I said to her, in the past when she was 5 or 6, she'd want me to coach her through like, what are your red thoughts? What are your green thoughts? We'd walk through it doing like cognitive restructuring, in a
Mhm.
6 year old sort of way. And this time, because I was like, I could walk you through your thoughts. I could ignore it and act like you're fine, even though I want you to know that I know you're not fine, or I
Mm,
can let you know that I know you're not fine, and then ask you, like there were three options there. And I was really surprised because I felt guilty about not saying something to her when I could clearly tell she was breathing heavily and she was struggling.
mm.
And she said, Mom, I'd rather you act like I'm fine and just talk to me normal so that it makes me feel,
Like,
um,
not
I guess it
anxious.
makes her feel less anxious, that I'm not highlighting it. And so I didn't expect her to say that. So every kid is different, and then they
Yep.
change too.
And they change. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's so funny to me when I know I don't have kids. So it's funny to me that I know a lot about kids and I don't have them, but that when all my friends became parents, they would say, "Oh my God, he's an amazing sleeper." And I would always add, "Right now." And they were like, "No, he's an amazing sleeper." And I was like, "Right now." And they're like, "No, I'm telling you." And then 6 months later, they'd be like, "I don't know what happened. He's a terrible sleeper." And like, that is what life is, you
Hmm.
know? It's just constant change and process. And, that's the hardest part, is that nothing is permanent.
Yeah. And sometimes that's like a good thing because you're like, okay, this will pass. Like this is a rough,
Right.
rough. It can go both ways for sure.
Exactly. Exactly. But I think that we have some weird default where we're waiting for, to get off the escalator and onto the landing,
Hmm.
just stay there on that landing forever, of like career success or, you know, um, adult success, whatever it is, whatever trapping or momentary elation.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
And then you get to the point where you're like, there really is no end goal. Like
right.
life is a series of obstacles and successes and celebrations and tragedies and successes and sadness. I mean, like that is life. And I think that's such a good point too in how we view our anxious kids. I think some parents view it as like they have a cold, metaphorically, and they need to get healed and fixed. And so it's like they were diagnosed with anxiety, we got treatment, and now they are cured of anxiety, and now we're done, which really
Right.
sets everybody up, I think, for failure in like this is a relationship with anxiety. And how do we have this relationship? And sometimes there'll be hard times and sometimes there'll be easy times. And I'm like filling their toolbox with support so that they can navigate that when they have their ups and downs.
Yeah. That's great. I want your toolbox.
Well, some are rusty tools, because
I
it's
don't
hard.
care. I'll use them. I'll take them.
Speaking of that, like if you had to go back in time, what would you have wanted your parent or parents to do differently when they're dealing with your anxiety?
Um, I think what I really, really needed was for someone to take me seriously and to walk me through the routine, to walk me through what was going to happen. Like I was always afraid to go to my father's house every other weekend. Every single week leading up to it, I would start having, on Monday, I'd start having these like minor flares of panic. And then Tuesday it would grow and it would grow until it was incapacitating. And, had someone said, I would always ask, like, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? What do I have to go? Do I have to, please don't make me go. I don't want to. And I would always be sent. I would always go. And then I would call my mom hysterically crying and she'd come get me. And I was like, why are you sending me if you're just going to come and get me? But I think what would have helped me is if they had sat me down and said, here's what you're going to do at your dad's. But like really walk me, like first you're going to get in the car, then you're going to drive up, you're going to pass through this area that you love, and you're going to see, this building and that building. And then you're going to get to your dad's and you're going to have some lunch and you're like, just take me
Mhm.
through it. And I think that really would have calmed me down, because there was so much fear of the unknown for me.
Yeah.
Even if it was known, even if I'm like, well, I assume we'll do the same thing we did last time, but I don't, maybe not. Maybe this time he's going to kidnap us. Like, you know,
Yeah. And I
so I think,
think that previewing, I think sometimes, especially in the anxiety and OCD world, we talk about reassurance as a bad thing when we're
right.
in like OCD loops, and or
Yes.
spoon feeding reassurance or being part of the compulsion.
But
And
I
I think,
don't see this as reassurance.
no, I don't either. And I think that that is maybe where the messaging gets a little bit too extreme in my
Mhm.
world,
Right.
where parents don't realize that because I've heard in my community like parents will say, well, the therapist is telling me not to tell them like anything that's going to be happening to like let them sit with discomfort. And I
Uh-huh.
think I think sometimes we swing too far to the other side where when you're dealing with anxiety, and you have to understand the difference between anxiety and OCD, because there are loops that are very different versus anxiety,
Mhm.
where previewing is what I call it,
I
previewing
love
what's
that.
to come
Love that.
is incredibly helpful. And I feel like some people don't naturally do it. I do it naturally with my kids. And I think I do it naturally with my kids because I'm an anxious person. And
Right.
so, I mean, I'm sure, well, I don't know, but maybe you do this too. It sounds like you do it because you do it with your dog. Like I over prepare for everything and it reduces my anxiety. Like I had to go and speak in Denver last weekend, or
Mhm.
maybe 2 weekends ago. I mean, I pull up the airport GPS. I look at where we're going to be going to the Airbnb. I look at what restaurants are near there that my daughter can eat at because she's got celiac. And I pulled up the comedy club where I'm speaking and I looked at like the seats and like what would the room look like. Like I need to know all that.
You and I would travel very well together. All I'm saying. I do
This
the exact same thing. I have to know, you
and then it
know?
reduces your anxiety,
Yeah,
right?
it does. It
Because you
does.
feel prepared. We're going to Japan in 2 weeks, which is so, I mean, very exciting. But like, I have been training for this trip for literally 6 months,
I'm
maybe a little bit
sure.
longer.
Yeah,
My
I'm sure.
my Tokyo map is like full of like little bookmarks everywhere. I've looked at the airport. Like, I mean, I have tried to practice my Japanese, like
Yeah.
because the more you know, I've watched a zillion Japanese YouTube vlogs.
Same. I mean, I've gone on Google Earth
Oh
to
yeah,
like plant myself in a place before I go driving,
yeah. To have that
like
visual. I mean, I actually have an Apple Notes doc of the picture of the restaurants because, well, partly my daughter has celiac and Japan's not really great, but I've gone on Google and taken the picture of the front of the restaurants so that I know what, because they're in Japanese too. So I know what it looks like so that when I'm
that's
there,
just
I'm not,
genius. That's just genius.
it's born from anxiety, but
I get it, but it's still genius.
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I think we don't I mean, if you're a parent and you don't have your own anxiety,
Yeah.
you may not realize that that level of previewing is comforting. It's not over accommodating to the point where you're growing your child's anxiety.
Right.
You are comforting them with knowledge, which can be
Right.
really helpful.
Yeah. I remember a friend of mine, well, actually no longer in touch with, but she was going somewhere to an artist residency that I'd been to. And leading up to it, she was asking me a ton of questions, like, where do you like all things that she was going to find to like learn. And, where do I eat? Where do I put my clothes? Where do I, how do I know who's there? What time well, I know how to eat, like, and it was not my anxiety. It was not my type of anxiety. Like, um, because I handle it. I like study up,
Yeah.
but so I didn't really, it was annoying to me. And but I answered her questions and then she got there and she kept on calling me and asking me more questions. I'm like, you're there. And and then she was like, I don't know, am I supposed to do this and this? And then all of a sudden it like clicked into place, like, oh my God, she's not being annoying, she's being anxious.
Yeah.
And like, even someone with anxiety, you don't always recognize. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a little, off topic, but not topic, but off,
Yeah.
course. You don't always recognize someone else's anxiety. It could be really irritating to you. But
Yeah.
once you identify it and put it in its proper place, you can handle it better, you know? But I can't imagine. I mean, even, as someone who does have profound anxiety, I can imagine like a parent having no anxiety, it would be very difficult to figure
Yeah.
these things out.
And the behaviors can get frustrating and
Yeah,
parents can get frustrated with not knowing like why are they asking this or why are they doing this or why can't they do this,
right,
especially, and even if you do have anxiety and it shows up in a different way, you may not get your child's anxiety. Like I get
right.
my two daughters anxiety more than I get my son's because his shows up in a different way. that my brain doesn't comprehend. And so it's a matter of getting into his brain and being like, this is how he's showing that he's anxious.
Yeah.
Which is different and hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That is hard. Wow.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be get in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it. So it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
So I went on your website and I was actually I got really enthralled by it because it was a really great page talking about your experiences. And one thing that you said was that when you were on your book tour, that you were disappointed to see that anxiety is still being treated in an antiquated way. Yeah, and I'd love to dive into that. What were you observing that you were seeing?
So, when I was writing the memoir about growing up with an undiagnosed panic disorder, for those who don't know, I kept on saying to myself, this is so dumb. Everyone knows what to do now. This is so dumb. This is so dumb. Am I just, adding basic crap to the world? And I really worried that all the reviews would be duh, we know, start again, Stern. But when I went to do my readings, even the very first reading, and people were asking me these questions, and I was like, are you joking me? They just, from things that are just wild to me, they should just toughen up and that kind of a thing. That sort of patriarchal, toxic masculinity version of how to parent someone with anxiety. And there was that. There was, the whole concept of raising the child you have and not the child you want. I had to really unpack that. And it was revelatory for a lot of people, which was very surprising to me. And so the level of conversation I thought that we were going to have was very, very different than the level of conversation we ended up having. And I realized, oh, how wrong was I that I thought this would be old, obvious, and it's not, which is worrisome about society that we have, caught up, but that what was needed out in the world was something I actually felt capable of providing. And, it was basically like going back to basics. And, and also like parents didn't realize that they had anxiety. There were many times in the audience when people were like, well, I don't have anxiety, but I have this, and this, and I have this, but I don't have anxiety, but I have this, and then would describe anxiety. And, and I wouldn't, they'd be like, oh, I'm perfectionist. I'm da-da. And afterwards I would go up to them. I wouldn't say anything in front of people, but afterwards I go up to them and I'd say, a lot of times anxiety disguises itself in really innovative ways. And sometimes it disguises itself as perfectionism, people pleasing, like there's all these ways. And so, maybe you don't have anxiety, but maybe you do. And it might be something interesting to look into. And she just was like, I might have anxiety. And I was like, yes, you might. So it was just a very I spent 2 years traveling the country and
wow, did you really?
Yeah, really, it was wild. And, it was a lot. I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people from kids age 5 and 6 to, the elderly. And they all, had a lot of questions that could be answered fairly easily. It was just really sort of alarming to me how far behind we are.
Yeah, and I think I know I don't realize how far behind we are when you live in a little bubble of educated people around mental health. And then when you go out to the broader public, I think I'm like cocooned in my own little circle. And I just recently did a media tour, but it was virtual. I'm not as brave as you. It was like for my OCD workbook. And I was very similar. I thought I was going to have this like in-depth conversation on all these radio shows about the depths of OCD. And it started with, can you tell us what that stands for? I was like, oh, wow, we're going super basic. And like, oh, I have a little OCD. And, oh, I think my colleague has a little OCD. She's kind of a neat freak too. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have a very basic conversation.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's wild. Where we're at.
Yeah. And a lot of people also were like, well, I have a panic disorder too. And I'd say, oh, well, tell me about it. And they'd be like, well, I had a panic attack once, like in 12th grade. And I'd be like, okay, and how old are you now? And they'd be like, I'm 36. And I'd be like, and have you struggled a lot with panic attacks since then? No, I just had one then. And so I have a panic disorder. And I was like, okay, that's not a panic disorder. Even the language of it, and the understanding of what it means. And, in a way, I was totally blindsided. And another way I was sort of grateful because I thought I was worried that I would be confused for a medical professional and, or a clinical psychologist, which I am not. And that people would be asking me these questions that I was just like, that were above my head and above my pay grade and couldn't answer. And I was really anxious about that, and that didn't happen. So I had so much less anxiety about my anxiety tour.
That is so funny. And I feel like that lived experience is the most powerful educational tool that people want to hear. And that's why I wanted to have you back on. I think people want to hear from people who have had this experience. I mean, that has power. I feel like people listen to me more because I have my own anxiety and I'm raising 3 kids with anxiety and OCD than my degree. That's like a side note, but it's like, okay, you're in the trenches. You understand this. You can tell parents how it feels to have a panic disorder and what things they can do to help their kids navigate that, which is powerful.
Yeah, I think it makes a really big difference if someone can understand an experience from inside the experience, and then, there's so many people who go to doctors who, medical doctors who will deny an experience that you're describing because they've never heard it before. or or you go to a doctor who will just sort of, you know, make you follow the rules of a book or the sort of practice of a book, and not really understand what it is that your lived experience is, because they've never suffered in that way. And I think it does actually add a huge benefit.
Yeah. When you get that like rare gem of a doctor who has their own anxiety or understands it, you know, that's gold. Because a lot of times they'll say like your kid's manipulating you, or it's behavior, or it's typical, or it's common, or they'll grow out of it. And all of those things are not really helpful for
Right.
a parent who's trying to help their kid with anxiety.
Right. And a lot of people mistake, think that like having a doctor with issues is an issue,
Hmm.
but no, it's the other way around.
Yeah, the more my my kids both have an endocrinologist, and he has type 1 diabetes, and I appreciate that because he talks to them on a different level, and I feel like he understands what they're experiencing. And I think, yeah, lived experience goes a long way, so that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, you've taken your own experience and your beautiful memoir, Little Panic, and you've propelled that into a bigger goal of educating people in general about mental health. So I wonder if you can talk to us about some of the projects that you're doing.
Yeah, I would love to. So, I have a digital workshop that I launched, God, I don't even know, maybe 4 months ago, um, called The Little Panic Approach to Supporting Your Anxious Child and Yourself. And it's a 9 module, 10 module course of basically bringing parents through what your child feels, your anxious child feels, what anxiety is exactly, why some of your best efforts backfire, what to do instead, understanding overreactions, how to tackle big fears, why your child feels unsafe, and ways to reframe concepts, and suggestions at how to look at your own anxiety. And then I created this thing years ago, around my book, that, and I don't remember who I created it for. It was like for a friend's kid. And it is called The Operating Manual of Emotions. And in it is this sort of guide that you can use your entire life. And it's basically you keeping track of your anxiety, but I have all these different prompts, and there's drawings that you make, and it's basically a way for kids to learn how to identify the somatic sensations in their body, and give it a name, tag it with a name, so that when they feel it, they're not overwhelmed by the sensation and they give it a million names, but they're like, oh, I know what this is. I'm worried to see Morgan, or so, and I really am kind of proud of that operating manual.
Yeah,
um
it sounds fantastic.
so I launched this course, and it's for parents who have no idea what they're doing, and parents who do have an idea of what they're doing. And there's a live every month with me, and you can ask me whatever questions you want. And it's just, a way for me to really sort of unpack and offer the best of everything I have learned and know. So there's that. And then I launched a newsletter called the How to Live newsletter. And it comes out every week, and it goes out to over 13,000 people. And it simplifies complex ideas from psychology and mental health. So I cover certain therapeutic modalities like EMDR and somatic experiencing, cognitive behavioral therapy, and I look at different psychological concepts like dysthymia, or concept is a broad word, but what's the difference between feelings and emotions, the idea of hypervigilance, so many other things. And then actual pioneers and therapists themselves. And yeah, I'm really into it. I really love it. I'm writing about, I basically, whatever is interesting me in the moment, I write about. And so for tomorrow, I'm writing about this Tibetan Buddhist concept called Shenpa. Do you know about this?
I don't.
So Shenpa is that moment before it's, when you get triggered by something that someone says or does, and when if you follow the trigger and you explode or you like get mad. So there's a moment right before that that's like a tightness in your body, like an aching, either like in your throat or in your chest. And that's Shenpa. That's when you're hooked. You're like hooked into the emotion.
Mm.
And you can either identify and like slow down and be like, oh, Shenpa, and like not follow the course of escalation, or, follow the course of escalation and get yourself in deep.
I
But
love that there's a word for that.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So it's called Shenpa, and it's you can use it around urges and cravings also.
Mhm.
It's this, it's the moment right before you do something you shouldn't do.
Yeah, that awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm writing about that for tomorrow. Last week was EMDR. Limerence I've written about, which is interesting. That Dorothy Tenov. Do you know about this limerence?
No.
So limerence is this quality of infatuation, basically. It's like an unrequited facet, like it's not obsession and it's not a crush, but it's somewhere in between the two.
Mhm.
And it's like this powerful need to be around this person that you really are thinking about all the time. You can't stop thinking about them. It's in this like very fine position between a real disorder and
Yeah.
and just a fun crush. And so there's a lot to say about limerence, but it was coined by a psychologist named Dorothy Tenov. So I try and introduce people to the people behind the concepts and, give a little history. And I really try and make it like a compelling story. And so that it's not like you're not reading a clinical text. You're not, it's not dense. It's not heavy. It's really for the general public. And it's my way of basically saying, like, I spent 23 years in therapy. I've read a ton. I know a ton. And let me tell you what I've learned and what has made a difference for me.
Yeah.
And that's basically what it is. It's an offering of my own that, I really believe, like, I really truly believe that mental health resources should be free.
Mhm.
And, my belief that they should be free and my reality that I have to make money to pay my rent, they're at odds. So my newsletter is
Funny.
free. But I ask people to donate. I ask people to upgrade. I create extra, bonus content for people who upgrade. And it really does make a huge difference, these donations. And, I don't quite get enough to pay my rent, but I'm working on it. If I could make enough money if I could make money from the newsletter, my ideal situation would be that I would then pick a different charity every month, and I would give like 10 or 20% to the charity, mental health charity. So, um, I wanted to act like, I'm giving something and I'm getting something and I'm giving something. Just sort of like like a reciprocal exchange.
Yeah. And I think that reciprocity is important because, the more that we can be financially secure, the more we can provide extra resources that are available to everybody. I mean, I do that too. Like my podcast every single week,
Yeah.
my YouTube videos every single week.
A
But my
ton of
courses cost money, like
course.
my membership costs money. But
Yeah.
I know that at any level, people can get access to something.
Yeah.
But the more people donate to your newsletter, the more you can disseminate information, and it becomes this working machine of support. So I mean, I totally get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, the more money I get, the less I have to hustle for other work and the more I can spend time researching.
right,
And
putting more effort into it. I mean, that's the reality of it. And you're a fantastic writer. I really enjoy your writing style. And so I'll definitely have to get your newsletter. I'm not on it.
yeah,
I'll have to get it. I will
it's
leave a link.
the howtolivenewsletter.org.
All right, howtolivenewsletter.org. Hopefully that's on your website as well, because I have like
It
no.
is. You can
Okay.
sign up on my website. Yeah.
Okay. I will link the newsletter. I will link the course too. The course looks really phenomenal. I think just hearing, your perspective on anxiety and talking to parents directly and telling them what ways they can help their child, knowing that you've had that lived experience of this is what would have helped me, I think
Yeah.
is super powerful. And so people can check that out as well.
Yeah.
And definitely your book, A Little Panic. I'll leave a link for that too. And then I will leave a link to our previous interview where we go in depth about your book, because that I think mental health memoirs are so important. And I think yours is like the only memoir that I've seen on panic disorder. I don't know if there
Yeah.
are any others.
I don't know of any other that is on panic disorder or childhood panic disorder, which is one of the reasons that I was like, I'm just going to write this, because I felt a lot of shame still, and embarrassment, but I really was like, this doesn't exist. It's absurd. Like
Yeah.
it's preposterous that this doesn't exist.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know why there are not enough mental health memoirs. And I feel like that's how people learn. They get into,
Yes.
the experience, the story of somebody else, and that really helps. So,
Yeah. Well, I do think, I understand why there aren't as many as there could be. It's a very difficult thing to put that out and then be reviewed,
yeah.
sort of judged on your own internal life. But I learned early on that there's a way to frame the reasons that you written your mental health memoir. And if you just continue to remind yourself of the reasons that you did it, all the other stuff kind of doesn't matter. It won't hit as hard,
Well, that is definitely the hope. You
Yeah.
have been one of the only people that has read my memoir.
I have. I'm very excited for it to come out.
Yeah, haven't even talked about it on the podcast. I'll save that for another episode. But I did have someone close to me say to me, because it's called Out of My Shell, and it's about social anxiety. And there is no memoir on social anxiety either, which I totally understand, because if you have social anxiety, putting yourself in the spotlight, so like a crazy anxious thing to do. But I did have someone very close to me say, I don't think you're going to be able to handle the reviews and the criticism. And I was like, that's the whole point of it. I'm coming out of my shell and I'm learning how to handle and navigate those things. If I'm not going to write the book because I'm afraid of that, that kind of goes against everything I talk about in my book.
Exactly. Yeah. And you will be able to handle it. You will. You just will, because the book is not for the reviewers.
Yeah.
Who the book is for. It really is inconsequential what they think. Even if they love it, it's inconsequential. It's not for them.
Right.
So you will be able to handle it.
I will like listen to this recording.
Well, good. But also, you know where to find me.
Yes. I will reach out to you if I'm like, oh my gosh, Amanda, I can't handle it. This is horrible.
Yeah, please do.
You should be okay. Yeah.
It'll be totally okay, but I am here and you know that. I hope you know
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I love that you were able to write your memoir and put it out there, and that you're now doing a newsletter and a course. And it's just beautiful, I think, to see the evolution of that support that's being paid forward to parents to help their kids. So
I hope it helps. I mean, I get good feedback,
100%.
but still, I hope it helps.
I'm sure it helps. So I will leave links in the show notes. Thanks for coming on again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking to you.
Well, I hope that you found that helpful. I always enjoy talking to her. If you didn't hear my episode with her a while ago, you can check that out. It's episode 116. So it's been a while since I've talked to her. This is episode 370. So quite a while. But that episode is called Growing Up with Separation Anxiety and Panic with Amanda Stern. So check out that interview as well after you listen to this one. If you go to my website at atparentingsurvival.com, just scroll to the bottom and there's a search button on the right side and you can just type in Amanda Stern and then you'll find that episode. Sometimes it's easier than trying to navigate through, your podcast platform. Definitely check out her stuff at amandastern.com. If you go to amandastern.com, you'll see on her menu How to Live newsletter. You'll see the Little Panic Workshop, which is the course on anxiety for parents to take, her appearances, her book, and her past projects. So definitely a great resource to check out. She's a fantastic writer, an incredible advocate for mental health, and I always enjoy talking to her. So check out her work, subscribe to her newsletter, look into her Little Panic Workshop. It sounds fantastic. I hope that you are doing well. Don't forget to hit a star on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher, wherever you consume this podcast, to rate it. That is greatly appreciated. If you have a few extra seconds and you write a review, I appreciate that even more. And if I see a new one, I feel like I haven't seen a new one this past week, but if I see a new one, I'll be reading it next week. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.